Welcome to Redefining Engagement. I'm Francesca Duma, Director of Audience Development and Strategy at Contribly. And in this show, I speak to leaders and innovators in the media industry so that we can bring tips, wisdom, ideas, and even some things to avoid so that we can all do more engagement better. So without further ado, let's move on to our next guest. Hi there, Mattia. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you all around engagement, but especially you have a little bit of a different definition of engagement, which you have mentioned to me before. So maybe we'd start off with a little introduction, if you wouldn't mind. So Mattia, go for it. Tell us about your experience.
Well, lovely to meet you, and thank you for the invitation to this interesting conversation. Yeah, my name is Mattia. I'm Italian. I'm based in London at Somerset House, as it says here. And I am this year, I don't really have a job title this year because I'm doing a fellowship with the International Center for Journalists, ICFJ. So I guess my fake job title is that I am a Knight Fellow with ICFJ. My career has always been centered around working in journalism from an innovation perspective, and with the imposter syndrome of working in journalism without being a journalist, without working in a newsroom, but rather in the context of journalism support organizations and educational institutions, kind of like to help journalists do their work better and bring some innovative perspectives, hopefully, into their work.
We've spoken a little bit about the imposter syndrome before, and I find it really interesting. Why would you say imposter syndrome? Because you do some really interesting work in journalism, even though you aren't a journalist. Talk a bit about that for me, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all, actually. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate, first of all, you saying interesting work. I think it's really simply the fact that I guess when I was younger, I wanted to be a journalist. And then kind of like that got lost a little bit in my career path. No regrets, to be honest. I'm very happy with what my career allowed me to do so far. But I think there is always the element of, knowing that I talk about journalism through the perspectives of the journalists and the people working in journalism organizations that I have the opportunity to work with and exchange. And I hope I'm representing truthfully and in a fair way what I hear from them. But of course, a lot of what I bring is not my direct experience. We're going to talk about audience engagement, for example. In this conversation, I never had to create an audience engagement strategy for my organizations because I've never been in an organization that needed an audience engagement strategy, I guess, beyond the work I was doing in various little projects. So yeah, maybe imposter syndrome is not even the right way to describe it, but I guess it's like being upfront about the fact that I try to collate experiences and things I learn from others and make sense of them in a way that helps others, even if they're not my direct experience in many cases.
You talk at a lot of events, to be fair. Has anybody ever called you out for it?
Absolutely no. That's the trick of imposter syndrome, right? It's all in our head. Nobody ever does.
True. I feel it all the time as well, so I'm not judging. Well, I guess we're here to talk about engagement. So my first question for you is, what is your definition of engagement?
And I think I'm going to start just being problematic as an interviewee from the beginning. Not only because I don't necessarily feel like I have a definition of engagement, also because, to be fair, audience engagement is not a topic that I specifically worked on for many years. I kind of got close to this during the fellowship that I've been doing during this year. But also because I think I'm kind of like disturbed by the way, as an industry, we talk about engagement in what sounds to me very often a very extractive way. I think engagement is, of course, like should be, at least, let's say, a byproduct of the service that we bring to people, to society, what we do for them, to inform them, to help them feel connected with each other. And we can expand so much more on this because it's really at the core of the mission of journalism itself, I think. I just sometimes I'm on LinkedIn reading, content from people in the industry talking about engagement. And I find myself being like, oh, if I read this from the perspective of someone who doesn't work in journalism, I'm not going to be pleased about what I read. It's going to be all about, they want to keep me as a subscriber. They want to make sure I don't churn so they don't lose my money. Like, it feels very disconnected from the people we're there to serve. And This is in part, I guess, a matter of definitions and the wording we use, but I think it's also to the point that we manifest reality with our words, like not only in journalism, in life. And so I think being more upfront and talking more, even if it's redundant sometimes, that we want audience engagement, not simply because we want the engagement, but because we want to serve people, and engagement is the way to get there. I think it would be very helpful to help us be even more innovative, honestly, at times.
I love what you're talking about when you talk about the definition, the mission that we're on. Do you think everyone is on that it has the same mission? What would you say that mission is or should be? Because we've spoken about that before, and I've found that absolutely fascinating.
I mean, that's what I've been obsessing about the full year, this idea of the mission of journalism and how probably we need to update it. I think, even just talking about journalism as a monolithic entity is wrong in itself. We know very well how many differences there are within. So I guess I'm talking about more of an aspirational mission, or what I believe the journalism industry should be, and should aim for. And in that sense, I think it's surprisingly hard, at least I found it surprisingly hard, to find a very well-crafted definition of the mission of journalism that everyone agrees on. But roughly, we usually talk about journalism as, having the mission of informing societies and informing people about what's going on in the world, in their country, in their community, so they can make informed decisions for their lives. Usually we talk about how to vote, at the next election. That's all true and valid. None of that is something that I think is wrong. I think I got to the point this year of realizing that it's really just not enough anymore in this age we're in, because with how information has been taken away from the one-to-many distribution of previous decades now, and how information flows nowadays, I kind of think information in itself is almost useless if we don't also help people understand what to do with that information. Help them understand how they can take action in their community, in society, with that information beyond just the act of voting, which is extremely important for a democracy, of course. So I think to me it's about expanding what is the usual definition of the mission of journalism that we are used to.
I find it always very interesting that what we're talking about, we talk about within our industry. We talk about it so much. And I love what you were saying right at the beginning, where you said, we look in. If anybody were looking in at what we were saying about our industry, they would be a little bit insulted. Mm-hmm. I find, is there a world where we have a different definition, where it's our audience that defines what engagement is? Like, do you think that's part of? What would that be if it were our audience defining engagement?
That's an extremely interesting question, and I think in part is happening already. I think there are a number of projects that more or less intentionally, are exploring this very question, but trying to build a different relationship with the audience that is not just the traditional, we create the content, we share it with you, now it's upon you to read it, enjoy it, share it, of course, that would be amazing. But when organizations that are able to create opportunities for people to understand together what that information means and make sense of it beyond just reading a piece of information. There's been a lot of interesting developments, I think, lately in terms of even just not only expanding the mission of journalism, but also expanding the definition of what counts as journalism. And another thing that I've been bumping my head against this year is that when we talk about journalism, we very often default to thinking about it as the content we produce, which of course is the most common way journalism manifests itself, with an article to read, a podcast to listen to, and so on. But journalism, to me, is not the content. Content is just a vehicle of what we want journalism to be. And so the idea of expanding the definition from content creators, writers, and so on, to conveners, for example, or coordinators is probably not the right word, but community coordinators and organizers, so that we really help people gather and be together, whether it's in person or online in different formats, to learn not only passively from the information that is given to them, but also in a more active and, I guess, participatory way.
I love that. This makes me think a lot about is it News Alchemists that you're part of?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about that. Like how are you working on that? I'd love to know more.
Oh, thank you for the question. Well, News Alchemist is the little project that I'm kind of being conceptualizing during the fellowship this year. And right now that my fellowship is about to finish in a couple of months, I am at this very moment, if anyone is listening, looking for funding to turn it into an initiative that can serve the industry. And the core idea for me was when I started exploring these questions that we're talking about right now about the mission of journalism and the definitions and so on, I gathered some of the smartest people that I am lucky to have in my network across the industry to kind of like understand together like how journalism is changing and how we want it to change in a more people-centered way, we like to say. And like how can we articulate a vision and a mission for an organization that will be dedicated to serving the industry and helping this transition? Because a lot of what we're discussing here, I'm glad that you asked me already about examples in a way, although we didn't go into specifics yet, but I know we will, because a lot of what I'm saying is not new. Like it's not, me discovering, I think we said discovering hot water, at least it's an Italian saying, and presenting it to everyone. But it's more like a lot of this is happening already. It just seems to me and to us as a group that it's exactly very disconnected, like atoms of good new ways of thinking about journalism that are happening and they're making a difference, but we still haven't found, it looks to us, the formula to getting into the mainstream, especially when it comes to talking with the audience, the people we're aiming to serve. We talk to them about journalism, most of them still think about the main brands that they read online, the main newspapers, the TV and so on, which is great, of course. How do we get to like bring this journalism, new ways of thinking about journalism more in the public conscience? I would get to the point of saying. I don't know if I am exaggerating a little.
Definitely.
So News Alchemist is pretty much an exercise into articulating all of this in a way that makes more sense than me blubbering about it right now, and then understanding how we can turn that into something that can actually help the organizations, the industry, makes this transition.
It's really fascinating what you're trying to achieve. It's a massive mission. I'd argue we have a marketing problem, and that's a little bit of what you're trying to do. Is the strategy behind the marketing for the industry. But I think going back to your original definition, which was, I love the fact that you are trying to push away from this engagement, and we're talking about solutions journalism, basically. Well, no, sorry, that's wrong. Well, that's part of it, but like user-centric journalism. That's something that seems to me like it might be extremely difficult to measure. Like in this new ideal world, how would you be measuring if that's successful or not?
Absolutely. I think that's an incredibly relevant question you're asking. And it's at the core, really, of, in my opinion, at the very least, of trying to help this transition happen, is figuring out this answer to this very question that we don't have. Like in journalism, we measure success usually in engagement. Here we are. And profit. Great. Of course, neither of those two things are wrong. Again, to the same thing I was saying before, they're not enough. I really think we need to find new ways to define success, first of all, and then measure it. And I'm careful about the word measuring it because I don't know, to be honest, if there are numbers that we can put to this. Maybe there are, but I don't have the answer for that yet. But I think really the idea of like, if the success of the journalism is the value we create for people, how can we measure that success in the value we create? What would be the quantitative equivalent of measuring success in value created? Of course, we can ask people something we should do more, talking directly with audiences and understanding what value are we creating for them? What do they want from journalism that could help them navigate their lives that they're currently not finding in the journalism products they consume? So that's definitely an element of it. But part of me wanting to continue this project, like the question is on point, because I think one of the very first steps would be to like bring a coalition of people from the industry, but also from the outside, to figure it out together. How do we measure this in new ways, at least to know then how we can find directions towards that goal that we want to measure?
If anyone is listening and does want to put some money into it, I think like this is a little bit key to the future of the industry. So it's very important. I understand that it's extremely frustrating every time we talk about measurement. It removes so much from the actual job that we're doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you were going to say
No,
something.
sorry, just to think about measurement,
Yeah.
because I mean, I studied statistics at the beginning, so I'm obsessed about numbers and I love measuring things, like even too much in my life. Maybe because of that, though, I am aware that not everything can be measured, and so when we try to optimize only for things we can measure, we inevitably leave stuff aside that might be extremely important. But simply because we don't know how to measure it, we don't pay enough attention to that. That's why I think it's absolutely great that as an industry, we have become savvier about measuring things, about having North Star metrics and engagement numbers. None of this is wrong, as long as we remember, though, that some things that we can't measure, maybe the value, are equally important, sometimes even more important.
It was very similar to living in a world where you just, in a company, it's the CFO making the decisions versus the CEO that's making long-term decisions that aren't. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, but in your experience, what are the aims of this audience engagement? Like when you're looking at audience engagement, I'm going to call it that because obviously that's not your definition.
Yeah.
What are the aims that we're trying to achieve? You talked about bringing value to people's lives. Is there anything else that we should be aiming for?
I think the value, and again, going back to the part that I feel I'm just starting in all of this, the same way of finding measurements is also defining better what value means, because it's surprisingly hard in a way. Like I say value, and many in our industry think of impact, which is something we talk a lot about, which is great, the impact of journalism. But with impact, we usually tend to think in grand terms, like change that we make happen in society, like we hold power to account, and so laws change as a result of an investigation. That's impact. It's one of the most important things that journalism does, but value is more of that, because value could be as simple as providing you a piece of interesting information about something you didn't know anything about, and it's going to be an interesting conversations that you're going to have with your friends or with your partner or with your family tomorrow. That's equally value. Not everything that is value needs to be this grand impact that we achieve through investigative journalism. I think it's really like finding the balance. A good friend, Sanuta Raghu, who is part of the News Alchemist group, and she works for Scroll in India, talks a lot about finding ways to build the net positive news experience. Because inevitably in journalism, a lot of what we produce is negative. Like we'll make people feel negative feelings as journalism inform them about wars and conflicts and corruption. And we shouldn't stop doing those things, obviously, because they create negative feelings. But how can we make sure that the overall experience that people get from interacting with journalism, and I'm saying intentionally interacting and not consuming content, of course, how can that be a net positive at the end of the day? So yes, you know that a lot is going on in the world that is negative, but we don't leave you powerless with just the headlines, which then leads to the topic of news avoidance, which is probably the topic of another podcast here.
Probably. That net positive is something that I've never worded it in that way, but it is something that we bring up so much because it's so true. A normal person, if you only give them negative content, they're not going to always want to engage. And the reality is, we do so much as people through humor and fun. Like if you looked at, some of the best theater shows or even some of the best movies that might be extremely depressing about a war or whatever, there is always massive amounts of humor and massive amounts of fun things happening. So it completely makes sense. I guess one of the questions is, what are the hurdles? What are the challenges do you see that are stopping the news brands currently from engaging better? Why aren't people already doing, interacting with their audience that way?
Honestly, I think that's a question for a PhD dissertation, probably, rather than a few seconds answer. I'm not trying to be funny here, although I hope I am. But I think it's difficult because I think there are many elements of that. Obviously, there is an element of just habit Like, we're used to do things in a certain way, and as humans, in everything we do, whether it's our works or professional or personal lives, it's hard to change. And what we're talking about here, like, I feel when I'm talking about redefining the mission, redefining what journalism is, we're talking about like systemic change, not just like small cosmetic adjustments to what we do and how we perceive things. And systemic change is incredibly hard. So I think there is a component, that is the main component of it. Obviously, as an industry, we have also talked about being in crisis, whatever we define that, for probably at least 2 decades. I don't know if a crisis can actually last that long. At some point, it's just the reality. But anyways, it's hard, of course, to change things significantly when the day-to-day is so hard, when, of course, a lot of jobs in the industry are going. I don't think, this is a bit hard to word in a way that it will not sound unpopular, but I don't think the success of journalism can be measured by the number of jobs that exist in journalism. In a hypothetical world where journalism can create the best value to society with less jobs, what's the problem? We should strive for that. But that doesn't mean that on a day-to-day for either one of us who loses a job in journalism, like, it's very hard to work in this environment and have space to think deeply about why we do certain things and how we can change. And that's why I think really one of the key elements to try to make this change. And I know you asked me about the challenge and kind of already going into solutions, but I hope you will apologize. You will forgive me for that.
I will.
I am the one apologizing. I think a lot of what we need, and here again I'm borrowing from another friend part of the group, Stili Charalambus of the Daily Maverick, we need more strategic leadership that can take that. You made the example before about a company making choices not simply by the CFO with the numbers, but by the CEO. Well, that's the equivalent of the CEO. We need more leadership level people who are able to embrace this change and understand that it's important not only for the survival of their own organization that they lead, but for the survival of the ecosystem overall. And sometimes the two things are not easy to square. Not always what is the immediate choice that will bring revenue to your organization is actually the right choice for the ecosystem as well, to build trust in journalism and so on. And we need to be very aware of that altogether.
So true. It is very difficult to plan very far in ahead. We're not football teams, and even football teams, they get rid of the coaches very, very quickly if they're not winning straight away. We're making big decisions. Have you experienced any strategies or seen any effective audience engagements experiences in your time throughout within the industry?
I think, starting from what we said before, of course, of not having direct experience of working that myself in audience engagement, I think I'm drawn to answering the question as a member of the audience, to be honest, because that's where I can bring a most concrete example. I'm Italian. I don't remember if I mentioned this at the start. And I don't have a high opinion of the media ecosystem in Italy in general. And yet, in the last 10, 12 years, a news organization, digital only, emerged. It's called Il Post. It's an organization that now I interact with every single day with their content, their initiatives, and so on. And I think they've been doing things differently, and that was their aim from the start. They were aware of how the ecosystem in Italy was quite broken, and they wanted to do things differently. And from a point of view of audience engagement, I would even doubt they ever use these words internally. I don't know if they have an audience engagement strategy, but what they ended up doing from the very beginning was just building a journalism that is much more conversational, like building a relationship really with the audience, where I never met in person, I think, any single person working at this organization. And yet I kind of feel like I know them because of the way they communicate with me, because of the fact, just for example, that they send out a daily newsletter at the end of the day that I read religiously, where they're really talking to me in a very informal way. They're not just giving me headlines. They're sharing the discussion they have within the team, for example, about what words to use in a headline rather than another, and what trade-offs they realized they had to make by using this word rather than another. They even put, screenshots of their Slack communications where they talk about their decisions, sometimes where they talk about the AC level inside the office and how people complain it's too cold and people is too hot. Like, it's very easy to relate to them as human beings, and therefore feeling that they are thinking of us as human beings. This is, of course, a matter of perception. They don't know who I am, so they're definitely not thinking of me as Mattia, but like it's audience engagement in a way that actually engages, in a way that like I feel I am contributed to something when I pay my membership. It's not a subscription. Everything is free on the website, but I, like many others, pay a membership fee to access like some extra perks that I wouldn't have without the membership, but mostly, to be very honest, because I really believe in what they're doing. I think it's important, and I think we need more of that. And so after a few years of launching their membership program, I think 4 or 5 years ago, if I'm not wrong, now that's the biggest revenue source by far. And
That
it allowed
sounds
them
so
to continue grow and
authentic.
expand.
Sorry,
Exactly.
sorry.
No,
You got me
I'm
so
glad.
excited.
I'm glad you said that, because I was looking, I think, in my mind for the word authenticity, and I couldn't find it. That's exactly the point.
It really is. And how did you originally hear about them? Because obviously you are now telling your point of view from the audience's side. How did you hear about them? What are the examples of the Slack stuff? That's fantastic. But like, how are they getting more people? How are they getting that reach to grow that authentic brand? From your point of view, at least.
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even remember how I got to know about them at the very start. I would not be surprised if just someone else, a friend, told me about them, and how it's probably still like one of their ways to be discovered, because I discovered them like even like at the very beginning of this organization. I had one friend of mine, and we often would like start conversation by saying, have you read about? I was like, yes, I read Il Posto. Of course I read about that story as well, because we knew we were both reading that. So then I had someone to talk about what I was reading with, and then at some point I introduced my parents to it, as someone working in journalism and being very critical of the sources they were consuming. In Italy, many other sources, I introduced them to Il Post. I told them, read more. And then at Christmas, I gave a membership to my mom as a present. So now they're also members of Il Post. So I would imagine that's still a lot of how it's working, although this is my personal experience, and so maybe I'm off in terms of that. But it's really another thing that they do very well is moderating the comments, for example, under the articles that you can read online. Like the comment section of Il Post is often as valuable, if not more, than the article you read itself, for the conversations they develop there. And I see there in the comments, like people are saying, thank you for this article, for talking about this story in this way that I cannot find anywhere else. I just subscribed, and I'm very happy I did. Like, it's very common to read this in the comments. So I don't know how people get there, but I know that many people, not just me, are finding something different that in the traditional way of journalism being done in Italy, which is surely not that dissimilar from many other countries, at the very least in Europe, they were not finding anymore.
I'm glad I'm not the only person potentially judging what where my parents get their information from. I know I am the one that it's always the case.
I hope your parents don't hate you the way they hate me every time I'm just scold them for, why are you still reading that source? I told you to stop.
Mattia, you're not the only one. Oh my God, you should see some of the debates that we've had in our house. It's brutal. We're like, hey, how about you read this version? And then all of us, maybe we won't go into detail just in case they listen to this. And
exactly, just
they
in
start
case.
Just in case. And I love that example. That example, I think, hits home so much, because young people are looking for authenticity. They're looking for, we want more transparency with how is this news made? What are the discussions that are there? I know for a fact that, when I was working within The Guardian, even joining those meetings where everybody was debating how they were going to approach a subject was one of the reasons that I have so much trust. So the fact that they're opening it in that way is so powerful for the brand itself. Do they also share like who are the people writing behind it? Is it very like authentic in terms of people, or is it just very much?
It is in an interesting way, because most of the articles that you read online are not, they don't have a byline, more like the Economist, with a few exceptions where it's just one reporter doing most of the story. But at the same time, in the newsletter, like maybe they talk a lot about themselves, they individually as people, and about the quirks, the different aspects. And you find the one, about the one who is very fastidious about details, and the other one who always makes jokes and complains about how the CEO always like intervenes in the conversation, so you feel like you start knowing them more personally. And then they even have like now a quarterly, I think it's like magazine, that it's more like a book than a magazine. Paper, I'm talking about an object that they started doing after their success online. And in there, everything is that there is a byline in every single piece there. And it's mostly the team, mostly the staff, sometimes also like writers that they bring in because of specific expertise on the topic of the magazine. So it's a bit of both, but it's an interesting thing how, again, going to the beginning, the articles are not, they don't have a byline, and yet there is this connection where you feel like you know about the individual people. And it's still a fairly small team, I guess, although it's been growing significantly in the recent years.
And looking at another brand, because we're not just here to push them specifically, even though that is a fantastic story, and I want more brands like that in the world. Do you have any have you got any examples of audiences interacting directly with editorial teams, like or potentially something where, you know, the readers are some interacted in a way that maybe surprised you? It wasn't an outcome that you were potentially expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was recently, like last month, at the Online News Association conference in the US in Atlanta, and I was actually following a panel, one of the few panels that was not about AI. Refreshing, I have to say, and it was very interesting because it was 4 or 5 like digital only organizations, I think, that were talking about conversational journalism, I think it was called. So a lot about doing journalism, for example, on WhatsApp and just engaging with their communities. And a lot of their experience, and I think, you know, one of the media there is called Documented, another is URL Media. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know much about the specific organizations beyond what I heard in during that session, but it was very interesting about a lot of them were like talking in a way, it really resonated with me for the way they were talking about what they do as the value they create, because a lot of their WhatsApp interactions with the people in their community was not about, you know, sharing an article that they wrote, but it was about giving answers to people questions and engaging directly. Like in the case of Documented, is a lot about helping immigrants in the US dealing with what does it mean to be an immigrant in the US and everything that goes with documentation, hence the name, and so on. And it's a lot of like literally service that maybe we wouldn't even perceive as journalism, because it's not about writing an article, although they do that too. And so this idea of having, like, even through the channel, not just through the method, a direct communications with the people in your community, so that sometimes you can bring them value, help them with your journalism, even if that's just answering a question that they have and not producing an article, a podcast, or else.
I love that. I think we learned a lot about that in COVID, when people had a lot of questions and they didn't know where they would go to get the answers to those. And it was one of the strongest times for journalism in the last few decades, potentially, because we were so needed. And I think people started realizing that we potentially have lost a little bit of that. I have no facts to back this up, but it's my gut feeling. That's where I'll leave that one there.
No, and that's a great example. And I'm looking for a name because I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, another organization of this is called Conecta Arizona. And it started as a project of one person, one journalist living in the US, in Arizona, of course, during COVID, to kind of like counter all the misinformation that she was saying about COVID, starting again from the conversation you and I were having a moment ago, from parents back in Mexico, I think is where she was from. And so like trying to create a WhatsApp community first to kind of like counter the misinformation that she was seeing in WhatsApp itself. That's how it started. And now it's a news organization. It's probably still a small team, but now they do more than just communicating on WhatsApp. But it literally started with this idea of, I have a direct channel where I can be of service to people I care about, like my parents, but also others as well, to help them with the information that they actually need to navigate their lives in the best possible way.
Fascinating. Such a good example, such a strong one. You mentioned AI. Maybe we should go down the tech route for a little moment.
Did I mention it? I don't remember.
You went, a conference that wasn't just about AI, which, to be fair, they all are at the moment, aren't they? It is very, very true. Fascinating, all of them. However, we want a bit of the old school stuff as well, once in a while. But what role do you see tech like AI and, data analytics and the rest play in the engagement efforts with our audience?
Yeah. Yeah, that's. I mean, I need to come clean here because, of course, over the last before doing this fellowship this year, like my last job for 4 years, I was leading an initiative here at the London School of Economics called Journalism AI, where literally, like, my job was to help news organizations and people in journalism understand artificial intelligence technologies, understand what they could provide in terms of support, and also what are the risks involved into using AI technologies. This started in 2019, so way before ChatGPT was even in like someone that people were thinking of, let alone using. So I'm just to say that I by no means an AI skeptic, even if I was joking about the over presence of AI in conference programs nowadays. I think there is a lot of space, to be honest, for these new technologies to help. And honestly, any new tool that can help us make our work better, more efficient, understanding audiences better through analyzing data and figuring out patterns and so on is definitely something we should welcome and get more of. I think sometimes I worry that a tendency that we have in journalism is jumping on the new shiny toy that is offered to us without a strategy for it. And that's where my joking about the overpresence about AI is not much joking, but a serious concern. That said, again, I feel like I'm going in circles in a way, but I do believe there is a lot we can do. Like, there are a lot of interesting examples there. Luckily, especially in the last few months, I see good initiatives popping up to help organizations use AI, not just for the sake of it, but with the specific intention of figuring out how we understand audiences better from the way they interact with the content and the information we produce, and how we can therefore try new things and make smarter decisions based on those insights. So I definitely am a believer in that opportunity. I just think it's extremely important that we go into that with a strategy and with a clear idea of why we should, because there are trade-offs that we need to accept anytime we use any AI tool. And it needs to be worth it, not just something we do because it's a cool new toy that everyone else is using and everyone else is saying that it's so cool and it makes our work more efficient, even if very few actually have evidence to back this up.
Well, it is very expensive as well, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are very aware of that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you're saying about the trade-offs, because and it goes back to the mission that you said right from the start. If we haven't got that common mission, if we're not even making our mission clear to our audience,
Yeah.
even when we're talking about AI, some of those trade-offs are potentially the trust that our audience might have in us. Have you seen any brands or any teams having the right conversations when they're integrating this AI or when they're looking into it? Or do you really worry that we're not doing that right and we're just looking at the shiny new toy at the moment?
No, I think that there are many in the industry who are getting this right in some way. I can't think of a specific example to bring to you of an organization that I think is doing it right. But what I can bring and that I found very encouraging was a report that was released earlier this year by a coalition of Swedish publishers, actually, under the coordination of the Nordic AI Journalism Network, who have been really working on this on this through the angle of transparency around AI. And full disclosure, I helped them a little bit at the beginning of the conception of this research when it came to designing the process through which to get the insights that they needed, let's say. I wasn't involved at all then in the research and in the publishing of the report, but what the report does is think very deeply and in a very clear way about what does it mean to be transparent with audiences about the use of AI. Because we tend to think that transparency is a good thing. And as a concept, of course, transparency is a good thing, but it can be very performative if we don't spend enough time thinking about how we are transparent. If we just put a plaster online on every article and say AI has helped us create this, we might make more damage than anything else, because that's not a transparency that actually helps building trust. And so in this report that they published earlier in the year, they have a few interesting recommendations about how news organizations can think of transparency and the questions that they should ask themselves when it comes to, if I have used these technologies in this piece of reporting, what do I need to say? In what way do I need to share it so that it will actually help build trust, which is the ultimate goal, rather than just being something that we do because we told you. So then you cannot accuse me, of not having been transparent about the use of technology that I'm doing.
That is a really interesting report. Would you say that's one of the pitfalls or challenges in audience engagement as well? Like there are a lot of pitfalls and challenges. Is that transparency or how we're wording it one of them, or are there more that we should be considering?
Possibly, I think it is, and it goes back to the very beginning of the conversation. Just, I think, being more upfront about why do we want engagement in the first place, and being clear that engagement is just means to an end about the value we want to create. And I'm sorry if I keep repeating value, because that's really the word I've been obsessing about this year. I think it is I think the pitfall itself is when we forget that the engagement is the means to an end and not just the ultimate goal, because then, and this links back also to the conversation about measurement, we went up to optimizing unintentionally, with the best intentions actually, for the wrong things.
And looking at that, because your job is you're looking at this big mission, you're really focusing on that. What is like the holy grail? Where do you see what do you see audiences? What should it look like if we were to do this perfectly? If we were doing it really well, let's say we manage it in 3 years, of 5, maybe 10. Okay, let's make it a little bit longer. What should it look like? What would the vision look like?
Oh, I mean, if I had the answer, maybe I would be not saying out loud, give me funding for money, because maybe I wouldn't need money. I would be making money already with that answer. I don't know. I think there are some components of it. I think in general, I don't know if this describes like in fully the vision, but I think to me, the idea is really to realize that the traditional way of doing journalism, which often ends up being like a mindless creation and writing on another piece of content without really asking why we're doing it in the first place, it's really at the core of most of the problems that we have in the industry. You said we have a marketing problem. I would add we have a business problem. We have a product problem. We have a not asking enough why problem. I think it's hard. We said already before that it's hard, so we don't need to repeat it. Obviously, it's not easy. It's not just, we can start tomorrow all doing things differently. But I just think we need to really embrace, and mostly also said before at the leadership level, we need to embrace this idea that what people want, what people need today is different. It has changed, and therefore we need to adapt to that. We need to become more relational. We need to take down, barriers from a news organization and this blob called the audience that we know nothing about. And I repeat, because for me it's important, a lot of this is happening already. It's not that everything is late right now. We just need to continue that way. We need to the good practice. We need to share it more. We need to somehow find together ways to just make mainstream what is now small pockets of innovation and improvements that are making journalism better. I was looking right before this conversation for an article I came across literally just a few days ago, which was very interesting. It was the summary of a book that has been published, and it was talking about 9 different ways by which news media are currently trying to forge, I'm reading, closer ties and stronger relations to their communities and audiences. It's like, that sounds amazing. And 9 ways that were moving from speaking to listening, moving from keeping the audience at arm's length to cooperating with the audience, from problem to solution, a lot of nice ways. And then I noticed, this article is 6 years old. It's nothing new. We've been on this journey already. And yet we're very much struggling to embrace this at an industry level.
It's interesting because it is the size of it. And I guess one of the topics we should talk about is individuals' skills. Because we can't necessarily get everybody to follow one exact vision. But if everyone if we did need to start really focusing on how we develop each other or individually, what do you think we should be focusing on for us to be better? If I were to meet someone tomorrow who's going to try and develop a new skill, what should we be talking about?
Wow. what a relevant question and what a complicated one as well, because I think it's individual, but it's also organizational at the same level. I think we need to create more opportunities, first of all, more platforms for this to happen. Like you kindly asked me about News Alchemist, the project that I've been developing before. Like in an essence, News Alchemist is like a dozen people coming together on a monthly basis to have these deep conversations together, and then going back into their newsrooms or organizations to understand how they can turn that into reality, into actual work, into new tactics, new methods. But that space for conversation, even if, at the beginning as a group, we were trying to say, let's make sure that this is not a space where we just talk. Let's find ways to do something together. Honestly, we didn't do much together. And yet right now, towards the end of the year, after meeting monthly since April, like in the last meeting, many were being like, I know we were saying that we should have done things and mostly we ended up talking, but my God, this was so useful. Because just the talking, the reflecting, the not being alone, figuring out that we have challenges, but also like we are in a moment of opportunity where we can make progress together. That was extremely valuable. So I think that definitely, I don't know if that answers directly your question about skills, but I think creating more spaces for everyone working in the industry who understands that this change is needed and is struggling to manifest it, to come together and figure out together what it means. Even if then we don't actually make it happen together as a collaboration, it's more of a cooperation side, but still we can all move our little piece forward.
That's fantastic. And I think we are in an industry that works at massive speed. It's the bike, it's going. You can't just stop the bike because then it falls over.
Yeah.
And I talk about it all the time. I used to be a teacher, and we have time for reflection,
Right.
and that happens a lot. And it is one of the major parts of your skill set. You can't take a lesson that was broken and take it into another room and do it again. You have to differentiate for your audience, for everything that you're doing. But we have the summer to reflect, because then you go back and you have the whole summer. So you're going to do and people say we do nothing in the summer. That's not true. You do a lot. Yeah. We need that. And I love the fact that you've created, this team that come together. Yeah. It would be fantastic if we could get to a place where we had more of those happening everywhere, and not just at the conferences that cost an absolute fortune to go to, that then the teams don't want to pay for the individuals within their groups to go to. We do need to do that. And it's not a skill, but it is a skill. It's a soft skill. And I agree with you completely.
Totally.
And what about the, maybe a last question for you. Mm-hmm. If you were going to give a bit of an engagement hack, or a hack to a team saying, listen, if you're going to start today, do this one thing, or just focus on this one thing, what would you say that one thing should be?
This is not going to surprise anybody, probably, considering the conversation we've just been having, but I think the hack would be take your team, go into a room, ideally outside of the newsroom, wherever you are. If the sun is shining, have this conversation at the park and talk together about why. Talk together about why you're working in journalism. Why do you think it's important to get your content, your products in front of people? Understand them, articulate together as a team what is the positive change you want to see happen in society through your journalism. It's not a hack, I get it, but it is the first thing I would suggest people to do.
You're basically trying to get people to have more leaders, and their leaders come together and bring it. That I get it. It's great. Such a good example. Mattia, thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully you get all of the funding that you need to be able to continue the amazing work that you're doing.
That's very kind, and thank you really for a great conversation.